So today we're starting with a chapter called The Duality of Life. The Duality of Life. Nature is a cosmic illusion suspended within the boundaries of time, space, and matter. When one awakens from this illusionary dream state, it is known as the Great Awakening. When people search for truth, they often look in two directions, at the form and at the formless, creating the idea of a duality in life.
Okay to go forward?
I think you should go another.
We'll go a little farther, yeah.
Brad?
The life force beyond all things has no form, yet it gives form to all things. In the illusionary world of thought, many believe the inner self is God and the outer self is the body. But I can assure you the inner self and the outer self are the same thing. Your eyes must see the singular if you want to find the truth. When you understand this, you will see through the illusionary duality of life.
That's all. I mean, I'll speak first. That's always been a powerful, both 68 and 69, you know, the life force beyond all things has no form, yet it gives form to all things. Really saying that everything in the universe is the same energy, but in a different form. And as a physician, this first paragraph on 69, where it says the inner self is, some people believe that the inner self is God and the outer self is the body, but I can assure you they're both the same thing. I think as I understand the body more and more as a manifestation of universal mind or of that divine force, that life force, then I see everything that the body produces as information that's useful. And if people can start listening to that information the body gives them, it's like listening to wisdom in another form, and it opens people's ears in a whole different way, rather than people being upset by the experience they're having from their body. They switch to having it as information and allowing their minds to quiet to be able to hear the information that it's giving. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I see some nods there. Does anybody want to say anything? Or
Yeah, I have a client right now as the young girl who was having panic attacks, and she would get so panicky about the panic attack that she would get violent. Right. I think I mentioned this to you one time before, Bill, and she was like hitting her head on the wall and to do anything to stop it. Right. And I finally said, you know, why does it frighten you? And she said, well, it's not normal. Right. And I said, well, everything that happens in the body is normal because the body is just a part of your life. You know, it's not that it's not normal, it's that you're not listening to it. Right. And I had that same conversation about, you know, see it as a signal that you need to just not, instead of hitting your head on the wall and getting frantic and screaming and crying out for help, that you need to just lie down and take some deep breaths and calm down and give your body a chance to rest. And the last time I talked to her, she said, you know, I did that and the panic attack went away.
Right.
And
well, and I remember Ofer sharing us that experience in Barcelona.
Right.
And that you just knew what to do, Ofer. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
You just knew to sit on the curb and allow it to pass. And that's a powerful level of insight to not be frightened by such an intense experience. Mm-hmm. Ofer, did you want to say anything about that, or?
I don't know. I think for me, this part is something which can be a little tricky. Because when I was younger, I mean, like maybe 15 years ago, like when I was 20, 23, maybe, or maybe even more 18 years ago. I don't know. So, do you hear me good?
Yeah.
Okay. So I remember I was in Laos. And I had this, this spiritual experience in which it's like it's written here that something changed. It's like time stopped, and I remember I no longer felt I'm apart from anything else. And it was a very powerful experience, and I think it lasted for like maybe a few hours, but then something changed in me for like maybe almost a year. And then I went back to my like regular states. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a trap because I spent many years looking to go back to that state in which I wasn't feeling Ofer, I was feeling something else.
Yes.
And it took me many years to, I think like we call it, with my friends, we call it the New Age lie, in which people are looking for this great experience, great awakening, in which something will happen and all their problems will be solved. And I do think it's possible to have moments in which you awake from the state of dream and you understand things differently, but then you go back to your regular states, and it's kind of like you shift between them.
Right.
So it's like it's an understanding that it's really hard to hold on to. And
Well,
I
that's
think
because, don't you think it's because people try to return to it with their intellect?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's something that you can't force.
No.
You can't force yourself into it. You just have to, you slip into it when you let go.
Yeah.
And for me, sometimes it's, I don't know, I see it as a trap. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. I understand what you're saying, but I've thought about that with Sid, because, you know, Sid was very human and prone to, you know, like everybody else, having bad moods and good moods and low moods, activities, you know, and it didn't bother him that he was like that. And, but yet he spent a lot of the first part of his life before he had his experience trying not to be like that. You know, trying to find that moment of perfection. And I think the great awakening is to realize, to me, to realize that none of it is, it's all an illusion. You know, it's all a creation of our own power to use our imagination to create whatever. And that everything is just information, that we're just telling ourselves where we are. So when we lose that dream state, what we're really saying is, you know, we're in a different state of mind. But once you've had the experience, you know you can have it. You know you can get back to it.
Yeah, we sort of live in a world made up of the things that we've learned and the judgments we've made and the sort of beliefs that we've inherited or decided that make up our lives. And we forget that that's all made up. But you know, we're sort of navigating through life with all of those various different filters on. And then occasionally they all drop away and we get to that quiet place, and it's knowing that that's underneath all of that, sort of all of those ideas that have been created throughout our lives, and that there's nothing in those ideas that we've got. They've done quite a good job of getting us to where we are. It's just they're not as helpful as we think they might be, or as solid as we think they might be as well. And I think that's where this really helps to sort of try and not dissolve them or make those beliefs less worthwhile, but makes them less substantial, less solid, and opens up the opportunity to see things differently and potentially more comfortably.
You know, and I love Sid's thing where he says, when the answer is simple, it's the spirit. When it's complex, it's the intellect. And, you know, when I think of having, going towards that experience that Ofer, you described so powerfully, which I haven't had, but I know that the direction is just to be in my life. You know, your dog lives in the present. He is where he is. Children are where they are. They are where they are. They're not in their head about, and I think Sid, said, if you can just live in the present moment as best as you can, with gratitude for whatever you've seen, you will be carried forward to see more. But if you get into your intellect and try to see more, you're just going to frustrate yourself. You know, it's so simple in a way. It is a trap. For the intellect. But if we know that it's a trap, and we know the way to look is not with the intellect, but just to be in our lives as gently and as lovingly as we can be, I think it's simpler than we sometimes make it. Huh?
I think it's very simple. That's the problem. I think
Yeah.
we live in a society that teaches us. A lot of my clients, the guys I work with, they think that if they stop worrying, that it's irresponsible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they think that if they don't worry excessively about the future, or if they don't constantly criticize themselves, so it's irresponsible.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, the understanding that you don't have to, even for me sometimes, yeah, that you don't have to think about what will happen in the future. I mean, you can plan, but don't necessarily ruminate about it all the time and worry about it. It's something that people find very hard to grasp because we are not taught to be this way.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I think that's why I find that people, sometimes it's hard for them to see it. The simplicity of living in the present moment, because they see it as irresponsible.
Yeah, and I hear that. And I think that's why we're doing this course, is because as people understand the principles behind life, the principles don't tell people what to do. It's just that things make more sense to do something that's more healthy rather than something that isn't healthy. You know, and of course, I always use that silly example of gravity. If you understand gravity, even if you're late for an appointment, you don't go out the third-story window of the hotel because you understand gravity. And so I think that's why we're doing what we're doing, because if it's so many courses in parenting and different things are telling people what to do rather than teaching them how the system works so they can see from inside in their own wisdom what to do, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, Ofer, do you want to read on page 70?
Yeah. All life is divine energy, whether in form or formless. When this energy takes form, we call it nature. Both the form and the formless together create the whole, the oneness of life, that which we call God. Should I continue?
Well, is there anything, is this okay? Should we go forward? I'm fine with you going forward, Ofer.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Nothing can possibly be greater or separate from the whole. Only the ego suffers such delusions. Our personal mind, or what is sometimes referred to as the ego, galvanized with our consciousness, equals our reality in its entirety. Our ego, combined with our five senses, often create distorting lenses that stop us from evolving to our true spiritual nature.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. That's just what you were saying, Bill.
Yeah. In what way, Judy? Because
Well, that the intellect distorts
yeah.
our understanding. You know, that we start trying to fathom it or think about it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And as I remember, I used to get freaked out sometimes. A couple of times Sid called me and he was upset about something, and he was something I did, you know, and he would be very critical and very forthcoming about it. And I would get all, you know, because I was still thinking, oh no, I failed, you know, I would go right into that way of thinking. And he would call me back an hour later about something else, like he'd never had the other phone call. And like, you know, I would say, you know, I've been sitting there crying for an hour, you know, and Sid had forgotten about it and it was over for him. And then I would say, Sid, you were so angry with me. And he said, no, I wasn't angry. He said, I just got in a low mood thinking about it. And, you know, wasn't a big deal. And, you know, and I thought, why can't we all just be that? I mean, it really was an eye opener for me that how little he held on to things that the rest of us would take so seriously, and over interpreting everything, you know, like trying to read into what do people really mean by this and why did I do that. And those are all questions that you don't have to ask if you understand that we're just riding the waves of life.
Right.
And our thinking is constantly variable, and it's all just energy and form. That's all it is.
I will say for myself that it doesn't mean that if I see that I've been unkind to somebody,
No, that I wouldn't say anything.
that I don't let them know that I apologize and I lost my bearings, but that you're right, you don't have to carry it forward that it means something about you as a person, or
Well, in retrospect, I'm not so certain that Sid was unkind to me as that I interpreted Sid's information as unkindness because it wasn't necessarily complimentary.
Right.
So, that's what I'm thinking, is that's the trick of it, that we forget that we're only seeing what we think about what our life is. We're not really, there's a gap between what one person may intend and what the other person may hear.
May experience. Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have something? You read this, Ofer. Did you have any comments before David speaks?
What Jody said, that reminds me of the story. We have, I heard it's like about two monks that they work together, and one is the teacher and the other is his pupil. And they come to a river and they want to cross the river. And next to the river, there's like a lady. So the teacher takes the lady and he picks her up and he takes her across the river, and then he puts her down and they keep walking. So the monk is not allowed to touch women. So his pupil walks with him and he's very confused. He doesn't understand. He just saw his teacher touching another woman, and you're not supposed to do it. So after like a mile that they're walking, he said, "Teacher, I have to ask you a question." And the teacher said, "What is the question?" He said, "You're not supposed to touch women, and you picked up the woman and you carried her in your hand." So the teacher tells him, "I only carried her across the river. You are still carrying her with you."
Yeah, you're still carrying her now. Yeah, good. Yeah, very.
That's a great story.
Exactly.
So for me, the process was when I understood. You said something about guilt and feeling shameful, maybe. So for me, I think when I started understanding that, I was so used to always, like, when I did something that wasn't so kind, or I used to, even though I used to say I'm sorry, but then I used to beat myself up, all the time. And I remember when I stopped, I realized that it doesn't make any sense. So I remember my girlfriend at the time, she came and she told me, it's like you start feeling guilty. It's not okay. And I told her, I remember I told her, it's not that I don't feel guilty. Okay, I did something wrong. I said I'm sorry, and I don't think about it anymore. And at first, for her, it was a shock. She thought I didn't care. It took her a while to understand that only after I accepted what I do, I could start changing my behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and it frees you up much more to be with her in the present, rather than being burdened by the guilt, which is
exactly.
I often tell people, and they're surprised. I say, guilt is really egotistical.
Yeah.
And they say, "What? Well, how can you say that?" And I said, "Well, who are we thinking about?
Yeah.
When we're beating ourselves up with guilt, we're thinking about ourselves,
Yeah.
and it's keeping us from being with others."
Mm-hmm.
David, did you have anything before we go forward?
Well, it's a sort of similar train, I suppose. Since coming across this understanding, I've got less guilty about the things that I do when I lose, if I am to lose my temper with children, which doesn't happen very, very often, but occasionally we get caught out. And in the past, I would have gone, okay, well, I can't really back down from that. I'll just, it will pass. We'll get over it. Whereas now, when I've realised that I've been out of line for whatever reason, I'll call them together and sit them down and we'll talk about it. And I go, look, I'm really sorry that I got caught up in whatever it was, and that was just the reaction I had. And it's happened. I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry. But that's where we are, and that's going to happen to all of us at times. But if we can take that step back and see it and talk to each other about it, then we'll have a more comfortable experience of it. And they're starting to do that with each other now. There's young girls, they wind each other up, but then they're now starting to realise that it's not personal, when it feels like it is. And so it's interesting just living in that understanding of how that actually plays out, and seeing that rub off on young people and older ones is just really quite exciting. And very, very, it's the simplicity of it, which is what makes it so powerful.
We teach much more by the way we are than by anything that comes out of our mouth, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. It used to get trotted out a lot when I joined the army about leadership by example, and you sort of understood the idea that yes, okay, I should demonstrate the way I should be in the way that, or the way I expect others to be by demonstrating that myself. But actually, it goes much broader than just your bearing as a serviceman or woman. It's actually being a genuinely decent human being, and we've all got the ability to do that. And that's how we're going to really make a change, is by allowing more people to be more open, a little bit more vulnerable, and to be themselves and realise that they're going to make mistakes. But that's okay, because we all will. And just seeing how that unfolds, because I think that's going to be quite a powerful thing to take forward.
Yes.
It comes to not taking ourselves so seriously. And I remember when my daughter was just a little girl, I think she was maybe 5, and I was tired and I was trying to do something, and she kept asking me this question, and I spoke to her sharply. I wasn't yelling at her, but I didn't answer her a very nice way. I was like, can you just wait? And then I felt terrible. She's a little kid. She has a question. I mean, how hard would that be? And so, a few minutes later, I went back and found her in her room, and I said, Sarah, I'm really sorry. Mommy should not have been so harsh, and I'm sorry I yelled. Could you ask me your question again? I'll be happy to answer it, and I'm really sorry. And she looked at me and she said, oh, Mommy, you don't have to be sorry. I know you love me.
Oh.
And it's so sweet, and that's, I think, what we sometimes miss. We miss the, just the innocence of our own humanity and the humanity of other people, which kids just know.
Right.
And then we kind of, as we get older, we start reading too much into everything.
Right. But I bet you also were teaching her that it's okay to come and say,
you're sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. But she handled it gracefully. It's like, well, it's a darn good thing you're sorry.
So I'm aware that we've gone about 23 minutes. I thought we'd do this next 2 pages before we stop. Is that okay?
Well, it's a fairly short chapter. There's only a few more pages.
We've been aiming at these lessons being only about 25 minutes because of knowing that I don't know if people have a different feeling, but I know I thought Ofer and David and Brad felt that it was best to keep it at about 25 minutes. Do people feel differently, or should we try to finish the chapter or look at the time?
I don't know. I think it's a long chapter.
Yeah. I think it's okay to stop the chapter at 25 minutes and restart it myself.
Okay. Let's do that.
At times we are captivated by our own ego and become prisoners of our contaminated thoughts. Ego creates self-importance and is strictly related to the personal self and the personal intellect. The ego creates duality and separates us from the great divine oneness and the wisdom that we seek. Do not try to understand the words of the wise from an intellectual perspective. Listen for a positive feeling. Positive feelings will bring you the answer you seek. Delving into the workings of your ego won't. And So I think our discussions are really beautiful, and I don't want to curtail them in order to go faster. So to me, these discussions have been wonderful. Does anybody want to start with this one?
I think I have a I think the example that captivates those pages for me perfectly is that when we get angry and we get so full of self-importance, and we really, we can actually hate the person in front of us and think how really bad things about him and even say nasty and mean things. And then when we calm down, we're like, oh shit, why did I do that? And we go back to our senses. I think that's a perfect example for that. When you get too caught up with emotion and thought, so you become a prisoner of your contaminated thoughts.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think those 2 pages pretty well summarize all of our previous discussions.
Yeah. And one of the things for me is that to realize, I think, Ofer, your point is a good one. One of the things that's happened for me, and I think for my clients, and I would suspect for the people here, all of you, is that you start to become more sensitive to being lost, more sensitive to being off glide path, if you will. And then we don't have to crash so much. We see that we've made a wrong turn, and you don't have to get totally off into the woods. and that's that, that's really nice. And I think a metaphor that came to me that never came to me before, Ofer, was if getting into a negative state of mind is taking on radioactivity, you want a really sensitive Geiger counter inside you. You don't want the Geiger counter not to register anything until you've got 1,000 units of radioactivity. Yeah. And I think part of what happens as people start to understand the principles is that the Geiger counter becomes sharper, and you actually aware that you're in a negative state of mind sooner. And sometimes it's actually more uncomfortable than it used to be, because it used to be where you lived frequently, and now it's something that you don't visit as often, and as it feels really uncomfortable. Can anybody else relate to that or not?
Yeah, I was speaking to a friend the other day who I've been speaking to for 7 years, and the reason I sort of started this whole journey, I suppose. And he's not been doing massively well over the last 9 or 10 years, I suppose. But in the last 6 months, he's had a real shift from feeling atrocious most of the time and completely lost in his thoughts about past events. And in the last couple of years, we've talked about his suicidal thoughts being actually signposts to sort of back off a bit rather than something he needs to act out, which in the past he's tried a couple of times and thankfully failed at. Well, in the last couple of months, he's actually been feeling really quite calm for the first time in 9 or 10 years. And that's freaked him out because he's not used to it. Yes. But he's also seen the comedy in that, which has been good. So he's been freaked out by the fact he's feeling calm, and he realizes that that's probably... so that was a really lovely conversation we had about that. And then about a week later, he was then feeling really upset again because he was still having some suicidal thoughts. I said, well, those thoughts that you were, when you weren't feeling well and it was all on top of you, you got used to the fact that suicidal thought was just there to try and nudge you in the right direction. Well, that's all it is now doing as well. You're just a bit, you're calm. So it's actually just triggering for no apparent reason, or maybe it is, but it doesn't have any more weight than it did when you weren't feeling well. And it was just, the way that I shouldn't have this kind of thought when I'm feeling like this. There's this and this and this don't equal that. And that's, that's really, really interesting just to sort of see that little journey that he's been on. And it completely talks to this, because he created a set of rules about when he should and shouldn't have certain types of thoughts.
Instead of just taking every experience as
As
information,
it comes. Yeah.
information, whether to look towards the intellect or to look towards just being present, right? Ofer, you look in deep thought. Anything as we wind down this section, is there anything that you want to say before we stop here?
I can tell you something about getting lost in thought.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing groups, and last month, one of the guys in the group, it was a group that's been going for 6 months, and everyone were like really starting to see their own thinking and like really going up. And one of the guys, he wasn't able to see it, and he started having suicidal thoughts. And we tried to tell him, like, listen, it's only your thinking. You shouldn't take it too seriously. And it didn't matter how much we told him. Eventually, last month, he took his own life. He hung himself. That was very, very sad, first of all. And second, we had to see it from the side. Everyone was shocked, but it was shocking that because we could see that his thoughts weren't real, but he couldn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, we couldn't make him see it. And sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. And for me, it was a lesson to be careful not to take my thoughts too seriously. It was a very big lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all the guys, I remember that's what they said. We had a meeting a week after, and they all said, like, they talked about how he couldn't see it, and they talked about how you should be careful not to go, when you go really down, you shouldn't stay in that place for too long. You should try to, snap out of it, and because if you dwell in it, I mean, if you dwell in it too much, you can actually start taking it too seriously. I think that was my lesson.
Yeah, and I certainly have had people that have taken their life in my practice, Ofer, and it is unsettling. And the metaphor that comes to me is that when we're really upset and in pain, it's like we're 5 feet underwater with a 3-foot snorkel.
Yeah.
And if we know, if at some level we can be open to the possibility that we have cork in our butt, that we're built, the default setting, we're like a cork. The default setting of a cork is on the surface. And if people cannot be frightened by their experience and realize that all they have to do is to quit, is to not to try to do anything with their thinking, but to just be in their life, experience the pain, just like you said on the curb that day, it will pass if we don't feed it. And those weights will drop away and we will rise back to the surface. What came to me is when I'm really in a low feeling state, the only thought that makes sense for me to take seriously is the thought that says, leave your thinking alone until you feel better. And I'm not saying that's easy. But if people can just get a glimpse that using your thinking when you're 5 feet under with a 3-foot snorkel is like taking a deep breath and wondering why you get a lung full of water. And but it is difficult to lose somebody. It certainly was for me every time.
Very, very difficult.
Yeah.
For me, and I think it's hard not to, it's hard to realize that people are still living their own thoughts,
Right.
No matter what we say to them, they're going to do what comes to them that makes sense to them in that moment.
Right.
And it's really, it's good for the group to be able to see that they tried, they said what was in their hearts, and it's the person's own choice ultimately in that moment.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with looking to say, well, in retrospect, is there something we could have done differently that we missed? And if we see something, then we learn from it and we go forward. But oftentimes there isn't. We just see,
Yeah.
no, I just don't see what could have done different. And yeah. So let's stop this lesson here, if it's okay. And I'm going to push pause.